How's it, guys? Welcome back to Rex to Rides, where we are still turning your hard-earned cash into unfinished projects and broken dreams. Now, this is the broken dream bit and the hard-earned cash bit. So, if you own a car, at some point in your ownership in your life, you're going to get told by a mechanic you need an engine overhaul, and often those words are just going to send shivers down your spine because it's like all you're going to see is money flying out, and you don't know if the guy's talking the truth or what's going on. And you start looking for new motors. That's a hell of a story. So please note this video is not about doing an engine overhaul. This is just an introduction to what it's all about. So you can sort of educate yourself on the workings of your motor and a bit of the terminology, so you can ask any questions that you feel should be asked from your behalf, because you're going to say what's an engine overhaul. He's going to say, hey, gaskets, we have to have the head skimmed, we have to have the head engineered, we have to do the rings, we have to hone the cylinders, we have to blah 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 blah, and all of this is going to sound Greek to you. So this video might be a little bit long, but this will sort of hopefully explain what's going on in your motor and what an overhaul is all about. So let's start off with this is the heart of the engine, really. This is the block, and inside this block it's a 4-cylinder motor. So this is a cylinder, obviously, one, two, three, four, and this is your pistons. Your pistons go up and down, and they're compressing, exhausting, doing all their intakes, doing all their thing, and that's what they're supposed to be doing. So inside your block, if you look really close, they often have a sleeve. So if your sleeves are very damaged, that is a whole sleeve that gets machined in there and pushed in. Often they can just get honed, depending on what's going on with them. So let's start with the basics. What happens here? Let's start with this one. So over here, you'll see they're all moving different ways. That's because of your crank. We'll show you that later. So here your piston starts at the top, and then as it turns, it starts to suck in from the inlet manifold. It starts to suck in your air and fuel mixture. Then it gets to the bottom, and that is called a stroke. So that's its stroke. That's the bore, and that's the stroke, right? So it gets to the bottom, and it starts, that's the intake stroke. It starts the compression stroke. So it comes up and compresses this air fuel mixture. You can see your head sits on top here, right? You can see how much it's actually compressing. This is a 2-liter motor, so that's 500 mils. It's compressing 500 mils into almost nothing here. So you do need quite a bit of compression on this. And that's your compression stroke. Then your spark plug sparks, and it pushes that down, and that's your power stroke. Now your fuel in the air is burnt, and it comes up, and that's the exhaust stroke. So it pushes it out the exhaust, and off it goes. Then it starts again. Inlet, compression, power stroke, exhaust stroke. It's 4 strokes, which is why it's called the 4-stroke motor. Now, it's also important to understand that these do not fire all at the same time. So these don't fire together, and then those, they fire in a different firing order. So each of your pistons are doing a different thing at a different time. One is doing its inlet, one is doing its power stroke, one is doing its compression stroke, and one is doing its exhaust stroke. And so your spark moves in the correct order. So what's happening underneath here, and what's causing this to turn, and how is it turning, and what's going on there? Remember, this is just the basics. So we're going to flip this over, and then you have your crankshaft. So this is your crank. We're going to be talking quite a bit about this. So you can see how it moves. It's actually like a snaky moving around. And as the piston pushes down, it turns the motor. And then the next one's firing, and it turns the motor. And then the next one's firing, and it turns the motor. And then the next one's firing, and it turns the motor. Now, one of the things you're going to be talking about, just to give this thing a little bit of momentum, right, this is a flywheel. And as you can see, this bolts on the end there. And it's quite heavy, so when you start your engine, you'll start a motor. I'm not sure if you can see that. Clips. It sort of sends a bendix into there. That's called the ring gear. And it turns it. That's actually the wrong way around. And it starts to turn the motor. So this is the circular momentum that keeps it so it doesn't go backwards, doesn't go the other way. It starts it off in one direction. That's the direction it runs in. So this is your ring gear. He's going to talk about your ring gear. It's very seldom these things go, but if you have a damaged bendix or a badly installed starter, that could happen. And then he'll talk about flywheel skimming. As you can see, there's a hell of a lot of grooves in here because your clutch sits on top here, and it's a pressure plate that pushes on here. And that's how your gearbox engages, by pushing onto this flywheel. So if he says your flywheel's going to need skimming, it's because it looks like that. And if you put a new clutch on, it's just going to destroy the clutch. So these are one of the things that may come up. That's a flywheel. The clutch pushes on it. Might need skimming because it looks like brake discs that are really, really worn. So that's that bit. So inside here are your big end bearings and all the bearings he's going to talk about. And this is kind of the work that's going to be needing doing on the block. Now let's get to the brains of the motor. Because with all these things happening in different times, different ways, different strokes for different folks, but everything is the same for the engine, you need to find a way to control the fuel coming in, the exhaust coming out, the compression, what's happening with all of this, as well as see these little channels here. That's where your oil's coming up because the head needs the lubrication, and your water channels because it all needs to be cooled down. So you've got oil and water coming up through these various channels, through the head, back down, and this is often where they say your head gasket's gone. How do you know? Because your oil and water is mixing. So let's get to the head gasket. That's a head gasket for this. It's actually a new gasket. And here you can see, if this thing goes between your cylinders there, or here, one is on the compression, the other one's on the exhaust. As that one comes up, it's trying to compress the fuel air mixture, but it's pushing it through into either the inlet or, that's where you're going to lose your compression. It's going through whichever stroke that's on, or that's on whichever of these cracks. Or it could go through a water channel into the piston. And you can see how much that compression, let me tell you, you're not going to compress water. Your engine will throw a rod or something. Or it can crack between the oil and the water. And then you've got oil-water mixture. So you have these various different ways in which this can fail. And often they don't fail for a hell of a long time. If your motor overheats, this can fail. If it's not installed properly, this can fail. If it's just a faulty gasket, this can fail, which that rarely happens. But there's often a reason why this fails. And that's when your car's going to overheat. You take it to the mechanic and he says, you might need an engine overhaul. So don't be too afraid of that, right? So that's your head gasket. We're going to leave that right there and introduce you to the head. So this is the head. And this is a simple overhead cam. And I'm going to try and show you, I don't know if you can see in here, there you can see one. Where are you now? Let's move this one. This is your cam going through the middle here. That's your camshaft. And it has different lobes on it. So as this turns, I'm actually going to take this head gasket off. As this turns, it pushes on the rocker, pushes up on the rocker, pushes down on the valve. Now this is the inlet side, and that's the exhaust side. So that's the inlet valve, that's the exhaust valve. Have I got that the right way around? Yes, I do. And as it just so happens, I have a couple of head bolts in my pocket. So we're going to line them up so they don't fall off. Just turn it a bit. So our head is on. Now this is very hard to turn because these rockers are quite tight and these valve springs are very strong. And this is what you're going to be also discussing quite a bit, are your valve stem seals. And this is we're going to flip it over just now and show you what your valve looks like. And then your clearances or your tappets or your valve clearances. So that essentially, that's the valve, that's your rocker, that's your clearance. So one thing he's going to check here is your lateral movement of this camshaft, how much it actually moves. All of this has to be off to do that. I'm not going to do it now. And obviously he's going to set your valve clearances by just adjusting that distance there. So when your motor is running here, that ticking, that is generally just your clearances. Usually not a problem, and you can just take the cover off and check them. You check them hot and cold. They've got a different specification for each. Now your block, with your pistons going up and down and your crank doing its thing, is communicating with the brains, which is saying you may have oxygen, you may have your fuel, and you may now exhaust with your timing chain. And that is what sits here. So I'm actually going to move the camera around. I'm not going to put it on. There we go. So as this turns, it's turning the chain, which is connected over there. Here it has some tensioners to keep it tense or to keep it tight. So these tensioners push in on the chain, and you may hear that your timing chain is stretched, or your tensioners are worn out, and that's what they mean. The two tensioners, they keep the timing chain taut, and the timing chain itself can stretch, or the correct term for that is elongate. So let's move back to this side. So if you're discussing timing chain, that is literally, or timing pulley, that is literally just what communicates what's happening with the pistons in the cylinders and the crankshaft to what the head has to do. So what goes wrong with the head? A lot goes wrong with the head. That's going to be probably your first indication of you're going to need an engine overhaul. Is your engine will overheat or something, and we get a lot of smoke coming out or something like that. That bolt does not want to come out, so I'm going to force it. So there's your valves. So as they push down, you can see this one is starting to open, and that is an inlet valve, or that is an exhaust valve. So that's going to be your first indication, because the problem with this is your head is made out of aluminium, and that is made out of cast iron. Aluminium is very, very good at conducting heat. So basically, you put a match on this side, you're going to burn your finger this side. Cast iron, not so much. It doesn't conduct heat very well. So it kind of remains in its same form. Your head can often buckle, especially if it's overheated. Your head will buckle, and that will cause your gasket to fail. And that will cause, so let's say your water's run out in the car, and your head is not getting enough water, it gets hot, it will buckle, and then you'll start getting oil going through the water channels and mixtures, and it'll look milky, and then oh, here's a problem. And that's why they have to skim it, so that surface sits 100% flush with a block. It has to be 100% flush. That is, it's not negotiable. Here, this head's been welded quite a bit. It's been skimmed quite a bit. It does work, but it's like pretty much at its limit, man. This thing has been skimmed so many times. Um, we've actually just got another head, and it'll work now, but we're not going to use it because we want the car to be right. So there you can see your little spark plugs going there. 1, 2, 3, 4. Pops on the top. And I reckon that's pretty self-explanatory. So they're going to talk about a gasket set and an overhaul set. Your gasket set is going to be your inlet manifold gaskets, these bits. It's going to be your head gasket, which we've had a look at. And your exhaust gasket that's coming on here. This one has a water pump gasket that covers this whole assembly at the side. This is a very clever little assembly. There's your oil pump, and it's all driven off a sprocket here, your oil filter, your distributor, everything. So that sort of sits there and does its job. So we don't need to worry about that, but that's just going to get a gasket. He's going to check your water pump, and he's going to check, see if there's any holes or anything. What caused this? This is your timing marks. So to set your timing, we're not going to go into detail on how that works. Basically, these things have to be synchronized with the head. Because as you can see, there is very, very little clearance here. So you look where that sits, and that piston is coming right up to there. And that's a hell of a lot of compression. So if that valve is pushed down and open at the wrong time, you're going to have a broken engine. So here they got lucky. You can see a little valve mark there and a tiny one there. That's all right. I got lucky. So that's essentially what's going on. I hope you've managed to keep up. It's very simple. So he's going to be replacing the head gasket. The head has to go in for engineering to skim it flat so it sits flush on here. And obviously you're replacing the inlet and the exhaust gaskets that actually sit on the head. So it's not too much at the moment. Now, your head job can be done, if it's just the head gasket, can be done with the engine in the car. As long as you can access the front, and then so you can set the timing correctly afterwards, because you have to take it off, you have to take a chain off. So you have to be able to access everything in the front. So it's quite a bit of work just to do that. Everything's got to be disconnected and everything in the front, so they've got access. So that isn't such an easy job. But your engine overhaul from that point on can be not so difficult because, sorry, as long as you can get to the bottom and you can get to the top, obviously your head is off, and you can get to the front, you can do your engine overhaul. So we're actually going to have a look-see at what happens now underneath. And what we're going to do is pull one of these, I've loosened it, pull one of these pistons, because this motor, I wanted to overhaul it, but I've gone so over budget on this car. This is a spare motor. It's going to get stripped down. It's going to get oiled. It's going to go into storage for spares, really. So this is your bottom of your conrod. The conrod is a connecting rod, which we're going to have a good look at now if we can get it off. If we can't get it off, well, then we won't be having a look at it now. We'll be having a look at it in another video. So these are nuts. We do try to keep everything in order. We don't try to do this often, but we're just giving it a little tap to get it off. You never want to go beating about this thing with a hammer, but right now I'm close to that point. So I'm just going to get a little screwdriver just to pry it off. returned with my weapon of choice, a screwdriver and a very tiny little hammer. So inside here is a bearing. Before I take it off, I actually want to talk about this a little bit, because this movement, now this is tight, remember that's now loose. That movement there, see if you can see it. So that way, lateral movement is okay, but up and down, it must have no movement. There you can hear there's quite a bit of movement, because inside here is a bearing. That's what they're talking about with the engine bearings, but it's not a bearing in the traditional sense. I don't want the piston to go, but it won't. So that's a bearing like that. You see what's happening here is there's oil actually coming through the crank. Okay, and it's going into here and it's going through there. So there's no so when we traditionally think of a bearing as having a roller or a ball or anything, this is just steel on steel. That's all it is. You don't want to pry these out with a screwdriver. You want to pry them out with a piece of wood. You can see this is worn, and the crank is also quite worn on this. So, you know, I'm not sure. Anyway, we're just going to put this into. You can see this is quite worn out. Now that's not great, and they're all like that, all of them. And this is the one thing that you really need to take note of. You have so many discussions with, this is a new car, and the oil technologies nowadays, you don't need to change every 10,000, and I don't need to service my car, I can't afford to service my car. No, it'll be fine for 30, 40,000. You got to remember that this oil is doing a lot of specific tasks, and one of the tasks on this whole crank, right? Let's take this puppy out. Now it wants to just go. There's your piston and your rings. Oh, man, that is not looking good. Okay, so you got your smaller bearings in there, and here is another half of that bearing. So this is what is actually that whole firepower from that engine is being transferred through the conrod. This is the connecting rod or the conrod onto your crankshaft. And there are no rollers, there are no balls or anything. It is simply bits of steel that have oil running in between them. And oil, as it gets hotter, gets thinner. Oil also wears out, it degrades over time. So this is one thing to really remember here, is that if those are not getting the correct oil, you are going to destroy your crank. Now you can see this crank isn't looking so hot anymore. Look at that. It might actually just be toast. This engine was run without an oil change for a hell of a long time. All these bearings were not replaced. This engine was overdue an overhaul, and it can cause long-term damage that you can actually, you know, how much is a new crank going to cost you, as opposed to just doing an oil service, you know. So guys, really, so what they're going to do, change oil. What they're going to do is replace these. So that that is actually a bearing set like that, and you get them for your crankshafts at the end of your connecting rod. Look how loose that is. There shouldn't be any movement there. And you get them for your crank connects to the block. So over here, let's take that off, that bit there. So what they're going to do is strip this down. Now, it's uncomfortable, but you can do it with the engine in the car. You can't do it with the engine in the car because, it's got a sump that sits here and a cross member here. So this is actually upside down at the moment, remember? And that sump, or that cross member, prevents you from getting the actual sump off. So this is your piston, and this is your oil ring here, and that is looking like toast. That's to prevent the oil from coming up. Let's turn this over so it makes more sense. Remember, we are upside down right now, and we are discovering that this engine was worth buying for the head and the inlet manifold, and the rest not so much. But anyway, we got us some spares. So there, it's open. You get your hand right through. So that's coming up and down. These rings are your compression rings, and it's your ring gap. So he's actually just going to replace all these rings. He's going to replace the bearing there. He's going to replace the bearing there. He's going to replace the bearing on the crankshaft. That's what he's talking about, all the gaskets. Then he's going to hone it, and it's basically a steel stone that's going to come around like that. Take it to a machining shop and run it up and down. So there's cross hatches. That'll also tell you if there's any low spots or any problems in the sleeve itself. And then he's going to put his new rings on. Now your honing grit has to match the ring, and then he's going to slide it back in new and reassemble. And that is essentially your engine overhaul. So you're doing, these are your bearings, we know that. We're doing your rings, we are honing it, we are skimming the head. And then the head, with the older head, is always better to test under pressure. And well, they pressure test it, but they need to test it under operating temperatures, because that head actually had a crack in it, and nobody ever tested it under operating temperature. So you go, you have it skimmed, you put it back on, your oil and water mixes, and you don't know what's wrong. You thought maybe I haven't torqued these down properly, I haven't made it tight enough, I haven't done it right. You go, you do it again, you get another head gasket, you go, you have to skim it again, and then it comes back skimmed, but nobody actually put it to operating temperature and see, no, okay, there's a crack. And now that crack we've had welded and everything, but I prefer the head off this motor. So this motor is going to go into storage, and we've got us some spare parts. So just to recap, there's your block, there's your sleeve, your cylinder sleeve. You can actually feel a bit of a lip here. That's your piston, your rings, and your bearings. So very important, keep your oil fresh. Your head gasket comes on top, your head comes on top. Your head then communicates to the bottom with the timing chain and seals off your oil and water channels and tells the valves what to do, when to open. And that's what he's doing basically for an engine overhaul. This is not a tremendously costly experience. I mean, I think the overhaul on this Isuzu was, I think, 13 or 14,000 all in, labor and all the materials, everything. And yeah, so watch the video a few times and get yourself familiar with what's going on. And when you're having that discussion with your mechanic, please just ask as many questions as you can. That if he doesn't want to answer your questions, or he gets irritated and with you, and then that's a red flag to me. It's a lot of money. People's cars are their lifeline, really. And you don't want to get stuck next to the road or anything. So if a guy doesn't want to make you feel comfortable about the work he's going to be doing on your motor, go find someone else, go get a second opinion, go ask for a compression test. They put a little gauge in the spark plug hole, and then they turn the motor and it tests. Is there compression in there? Are these rings working? So there's a lot of tests you can do. Ask him what tests he's doing and what they are doing. And so yeah, guys, I hope this video helps someone out there. And please like and subscribe because we have gone over budget. Really need the money. Thanks, guys.